What's up, guys? mcstu here, and today we're going to talk about Shipbuilding 101 for beginners. This is going to be a crash course, top 5 things that you need to do as soon as you start playing and progressing at level 5, or once you finish the tutorial at level 10. We'll take a look at a tier 1 ship and look at also the difference between what that looks like compared to a tier 5. What you're going to find is the methodology is the same. I just want to show the progression for those two different things. If you would like more in-depth guides on any of the subjects that we cover here today, highly recommend coming over to my YouTube channel, the main page, and clicking on the search icon here at the top, and you can search any of these subjects and find in-depth guides about any of these subjects that we're going to cover today. There is also beginner guide playlists that you can pull up and go through. Very helpful. There's quite a few videos in there, as well as how-tos that are going to cover also a little bit more advanced stuff as well, and a lot of the systems that are in the game, like fleets and reputation and all of that kind of stuff. So anything that you're looking for in game and you want something more specific, in depth on, check out the main channel here. Use the search or go through the beginner's guides. So let's go ahead and jump right into it with the first tip, must do. So what you're going to want to do is locate your ship's power settings console. It's down here on the bottom left on the stock setup. You're going to want to click on the top right button here, and this is going to allow you to change the interface of this particular panel. And you're going to see stock, everything is set at a balanced state. What you're going to want to do is take your weapons and you're going to want to turn that weapons power all the way up and lock it so that when you adjust these other things, it doesn't affect that. Shields are not a big deal in this game, unfortunately. It's a little different than the show. When the shields were down, everything was over. In this game, it's not quite like that. So I generally will focus into engines as my secondary, and I crank all that up. You still will have a little bit of power in shields and auxiliary, but again, in the early game, that's just not going to make a big difference there. Auxiliary is generally going to be for science-based stuff, torpedoes or carrier build kind of things, which are going to be something that you will not really be able to get too much into until later on in the game. So first tip, make sure you crank these weapons all the way up. It's going to make a night and day difference, 50% boost to your base weapons output, and that's going to be huge for progressing through the story missions and early game. Secondly, let's go ahead and take a look at our weapons and what we're going to want to do here. So number one is your weapons need to be all the same. And when I say all the same, what I mean is energy type. So on this particular build, we have phasers, and I'm using all phaser beams. Early game, when you are getting random drops, you might end up seeing that you get, say, a disruptor beam that's Mark II or Mark III, something that's higher than what you already have. The temptation is going to be to want to throw that on there. You're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to wait until you get another drop of the same energy type. You might also find that maybe you get a drop for a phaser cannon. Very early on, that's not a big deal if you mix cannons and you mix beams, as long as they're the same type. But when we get into our rotations and our firing modes, you're going to find that's going to be a problem. So what you're going to want to do is be collecting weapons, keeping the weapons that are going to be matching for the energy type that you're doing. It doesn't have to be phasers. It can be any of them that you want. You want it to be the same. So if you want to go disruptor, but you're going to need to stick with disruptor beams or cannons and make sure that those are all matching. The reason for this is going to be the third tip here, and we're going to talk about tactical consoles. So your tactical consoles are going to be consoles that boost a particular energy type or a particular kind of weapon. So there's all the different energy type boosts. There are torpedoes. There's even more specific, quantum torpedo boosts. You want to have this match your main weapons type. So in this particular one, we're running phasers. So you need to have phaser boosting tactical consoles. You don't want to mix this. So if you take a look at the tier 5 ship, you'll see we have additional slots for our tactical. And I know myself early on when I first started playing the game, I had some disruptors, and I had some phasers. They were all mixed on there. And on the tactical consoles, I put in disruptor and I put in some phaser. But what that was doing is splitting the difference, and basically all of my weapons did less damage because I was splitting that up, as opposed to having 3 consoles that boost all of the weapons that are on my ship, as opposed to having 2 consoles that boost phaser and 1 console that boost disruptor. That's a net loss for you. So you want to make sure that all of your tactical consoles are the same and match your actual weapons type that you're using. Secondary, I guess, in this conversation is you might want to run a torpedo. That's personal preference. I kind of like to. It kind of changes things up for me. We're in combat, especially once you get into a tier 2, 3, or 4 ship where you have more weapon slots in the front. If you're going to do that, do not boost the torpedo, because again, that's going to end up being a net loss for all the other weapons on your ship, and all the other weapons on your ship are going to do tons more damage than that 1 torpedo. I would not go with multiple torpedoes. When you look at the tooltip, you'll see that in a lot of cases they'll have a very large DPS or damage number associated with it. The issue is that those torpedoes, best case scenario, are going to fire every 6 seconds, and that's if you have the right firing arc for your ship in relation to your target, and most of the time that's not happening. And so what that means is that number that it's giving you is not accurate. You are going to get much less damage out of that torpedo that looks like it's doing a lot more, compared to what you would get out of just 1 phaser, disruptor, or any other kind of beam array, because that beam array has a much wider firing arc and it's constantly firing. So if you're going to do a torpedo, only do 1, and I would highly recommend putting that up front for best results. Next, let's take a look. Well, I guess before we jump into the next one, let's just talk about the consoles in the middle. I kind of gloss over these because early game, you're just getting drops of whatever. And so, I mean, just put in whatever you get. But if you're getting, enough where you have some choices, for engineering, you're going to want to look for anything that's going to boost your weapon's power or your particular energy type that you have. Some of the episodes when you get kind of mid-game are going to drop some good consoles. And you'll see here on the tier 5 ship that I have some universal consoles that are here that will boost phaser damage or give me crit chance. Those can be used in either one of the slots, but early game, you're going to be locked in to using engineering consoles and engineering slots. So anything that's going to boost your damage output or anything that's going to give you a damage resistance for engineering is going to be the best. All damage resistance is going to give you the best coverage for that, because you are going to start to encounter different enemies. There are a host of different consoles that give you damage resistance that are specific for 1, 2, or 4 different energy types. I personally like to go with the all damage if I'm lucky enough to get a drop on that, or when you unlock crafting, or if you get a little bit of EC, you can purchase one of these off the exchange pretty cheap. But that would be my recommendation, and you can stack these particular consoles as well. So early game, before you start unlocking rep gear and getting some of the better mission rewards, these are going to be the 2 that I recommend. For science consoles, there's not a lot here in terms of what's going to drop that's going to be very impactful to the build. So I picked this one because I kind of had to pick something to put here. And this is boosting my maximum shield capacity. I would stay away from things that are regen related in early game, because that regen only really takes place when you're out of combat. So you're better to go in with a larger hit point pool for, in this instance, the shields, than you would be for regen, because that regen's only going to go into effect once you're out of combat. So I would just slot anything that you have in the science. Again, I don't want to get real deep into this part of it here because it's kind of outside the 101 build, and it's just not super impactful early on in the game. Next, let's take a look at stations. So this is very, very simplistic here, and we're going to just talk about kind of these basic ones, and then we'll look at the tier 5 here in just a moment to show what's going to be on my top pick in terms of what we're using for the science part of it. So the main thing that you have to do is you have to pick what kind of weapons firing mode you're going to have as your main firing mode. In this instance, I have fire at will, and we'll just click on this. You can either use fire at will or you can use beam overload. That's your personal preference. Pick one, and as your ship progresses and you get better ships, you want this firing mode to be the highest version of it that you can have. So your firing modes and pretty much all the different bridge officer abilities have a tier 1 through 3, and if this particular ship had a lieutenant commander seat like my tier 5 here does, I would have fire at will 3 in it. So I want to prioritize the highest firing mode that I possibly can. Next, for engineering, your number 1 that you're going to want to have is emergency power to weapons. This is giving us a big boost to our power settings and bonus damage. And you're going to want to have, again, just like with the fire at will, the highest version of this you can. So when you get a ship that has, a higher rank of engineering, you're going to want to pick the highest that you can slot of emergency power to weapons. Now, early on, it's kind of a bummer because my number 1 pick is not available in the lieutenant seat of the science. So if we take a look at the tier 5 version of this, as soon as you're able to unlock lieutenant seat on your science slot here, you're going to want to have photonic officer. So if this had a commander science seat, I would run photonic officer 3. And what photonic officer does is it cools down all of your other bridge officer abilities. And we'll get into this more when we talk about rotation. So while it's running each of your other abilities, in this instance, we have fire at will and we have emergency power to weapons, you're going to see that this ticks down faster every couple seconds. And so you're going to be able to use them much, much faster. Let's talk about the rotation of these, okay? And this is going to be the most simplistic that you possibly would have at tier 10 to 20. So what I have is, first we have emergency power to weapons. Then we are using a battery, and this is something that you'll see dropping quite a bit early on in game. This is giving us a boost to our weapons power, and then we have our main firing mode. So if I'm going into combat, I am first clicking this, then the battery, and then fire at will, and I'm engaging the enemy. And as soon as these are off cooldown, I am constantly rotating these as soon as they're off cooldown. Now, if this was in our tier 5 ship, like you see now on screen, we would be using photonic officer and then scrolling through the rest of the abilities that we have and keeping those up full time. So we want to keep these main 3 things up as much as possible while we're in combat. Setting up a keybind at some point would make sense. I have a video on that, so check that out if you're interested in that. But that, as soon as you start to get into a tier 2, 3, 4, keybinds become a lot nicer to have, because then you can just keep that rotation on constantly by just clicking one of the buttons on your keyboard, and you can focus on using heals or your captain's abilities that you'll get later on in game and using those where you want to, and piloting your ship and targeting, and you don't have to worry about coming up and constantly clicking this rotation, seeing what's off of cooldown. So big help for keeping that rotation up. So you see how we're kind of chaining all of these effects together, and they're synergizing. And as you progress through the game and you unlock more abilities and things, you're going to find this list kind of gets bigger, and you'll be boosting up more and more stuff. So one thing that does that is going to be your batteries. So this is a weapons battery. This is going to give us a plus 75 to our weapons power settings for 20 seconds. The one that I moved out of the way is a more advanced version of it. This actually gives us bonus damage to our weapons. This is a craftable or something you can buy on the exchange. Once you unlock that, you'll want to craft these particular batteries and not be using the ones that normally drop. But if I was going to chain all of this together, I would go photonic officer. So I get all my cooldowns going. Batteries, so we're boosting our weapons. Emergency power to weapons, so we're boosting our weapons even more. We have attack pattern beta, because this is giving us now a debuff for our weapons anytime we hit an enemy. My main firing mode, so now that I've hit the main firing mode, it's going to get all the benefits of the things that I clicked before. And then lastly, I'm clicking my torpedo spread, so that as soon as I get in a right firing arc for the torpedo, that's going to shoot out three different torpedoes to hit different targets. So again, now that's chaining together 1, 2, 3 abilities that are all boosting our main firing mode. And that is the name of the game, is synergizing your build, be it the weapons and how you're boosting them with your tactical consoles, how you're boosting them with all your other consoles that have passives with some healing regen built into that, and then your bridge officer modes are all chaining together in order to boost a particular thing. What I see a lot is same thing with the weapons and the consoles. Is a lot of people they'll throw in a little bit of this and a little bit of that because it does this one specific thing that they think is important, and that's not how you want to think about this. You want to think about, how do I continually stack and maximize my main firing mode? That's the name of the game. And the more you focus on that, the more you're going to find that you're being able to, beat enemies a lot easier and progress through the missions and have a lot more fun doing it. The main things that you want to focus on is, number one, tactical, the highest level of the particular firing mode that you're doing. So in this instance, it's fire at will. So I'm slotting fire at will 3 because that's the highest one I can do. For science, I am slotting the highest version I can put on the ship for photonic officer, because this is giving me my cooldowns to keep all of my abilities up and usable much, much quicker. And for engineering, I'm using the highest ability that I can slot for emergency power to weapons. Everything else, backfill as you start to level up your ships. Lastly, a little bonus, let's talk about the HUD and how to adjust that. Let's start with the trays here. So when you start off, your tray is going to look like this. And to change that, this bottom button here, show tray settings, when you hover over it, I personally like to do 4. There's others that will go, more, and they'll go 8 and they'll move it off to the side. I personally like to have 4. If you want to adjust where these things are at, or if you want to add, say, a second tray, if you hit F12, that'll open up your HUD and you can move this stuff wherever you want to. Now for me, for end game and how I normally play, I normally do a second tray. So if I hit new, you'll see another tray popped up over here. I'm just going to move it off to the side. I believe that this tray normally, we hit F12 again, starts in a different configuration. So I think when you get it, it's actually going to be up and down like this. If you like that, you can keep it like that and move it wherever you want to, organize your stuff. And I'm just showing you how I personally like mine. Everybody is different, so set it up however you want to. But personally, I like to have mine 2 next to each other, and then I go 4 trays normally on this side is normally how I set this up. So F12 will let you move all of this stuff around or create another tray, and then using the little buttons here, and there's repeats of them, will allow you to add rows or subtract rows from them. Also on the top corner of these, so this top button here, we have show available skills. If you click on that, this is where it shows you all the different skills you have. So this is going to have captain's abilities, all your bridge officer abilities, and it's also going to have any kind of clickies that you might have from consoles. Clickies from consoles will be a console that you have. It normally is going to have some kind of passives where it gives you boost to your ship, but then it'll have some kind of activatable associated with it. And in that instance, that activatable is going to be listed here. I don't think I have any of those on here, but I'm on a science character. This is a science captain's ability. So if you click unlock tray, you can drag things onto the tray and organize your tray by right-clicking, and then you can move them around here. So to drag them down, it's left-click, but to move them around, it's right-click. Otherwise, you'll activate the ability. Make sure you lock your tray when you're done, because if you don't, you'll be in the middle of combat, clicking stuff, and you'll accidentally drag things around, and it can be a real bummer. All right, guys, so I hope that was helpful. Again, it's just a 101, top 5 just basics for shipbuilding. If you're looking for more advanced concept builds, I generally focus on not specific ship builds, because there's hundreds of ships in the game and they're all laid out a little bit different. But what doesn't change is the methodology behind how you put together a ship and how you think about putting together a ship. And that can be translated into any other ship essentially within the same kind of class, right? So if you're wanting to transfer this onto a science ship that's not quite as good, although you could still do it. Because I'll get the question a lot, can you do this build on this particular ship? And the answer is no. There's just too many to do that. And so you have to look at it, and maybe that ship has one less tactical slot for consoles and one extra engineering. Well, you're going to drop one of your tactical consoles because it won't fit, and you're going to look at that engineering slot and say, okay, what can I fit in here? What kind of universal console or engineering console is going to complement the build and the focus on this build? And then you go ahead and pick that particular one. All right, guys, if you made it all the way to the end and this was helpful, please hit that thumbs up button. Consider giving me the subscribe button hit as well. That would be much appreciated. If you want more specific help on this, I know this game's somewhat complicated, especially when you're first getting into it. Check out the Discord server. It's down in the description. We have over 3,000 people in there, and we're more than happy to help and just have a good time. So please consider joining that if you'd like some additional help or maybe some friends to play with. All right, guys, until next time, appreciate you watching. Have a good one. Hey, guys, appreciate you watching. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button, ring the bell, and sub to the channel for the latest news updates and how-to guides.